Hi, I'm David Rowe, Associate Professor of English at the University of Utah, author of Minor Transpacific, forthcoming from Stanford University Press, 2021. Now, you might already be familiar with Min Jin Lee's Pachinko, which follows several generations of Zainichi Koreans in Japan as they struggle for survival in the face of discrimination and come to terms with their Korean-Japanese identities. It was a finalist for the National Book Awards and is currently in production for Apple TV as a streaming series to be debuted later this year. Now, I covered Pachinko in chapter 5 of my book, but I argue that's the latest in a dialogue between Zainichi and Korean American writers. But we generally don't think of the two as being in conversation. The question is why? And we have to understand a disciplinary division between Asian studies and Asian American studies. Historically, there's a tension between the two fields. Their reluctance to engage with one another is perhaps the legacy of their historical alignments. Asian American studies with the social justice movements and civil rights protests in the 1960s, and Asian studies and area studies writ large with national security and the intelligence apparatus. So that results in Asian American studies tending to focus on the U.S. as the site of cultural and political formation, and not really taking account Asian intermediary sites. I need to spend a bit of time giving you a criminally brief overview of Zainichi history in Japan. Zainichi Koreans have a more robust history of immigration to Japan compared to Korean American immigration. Japan annexed Korea in 1910 and began funneling its resources to its colonial center. It's estimated by 1945 there were 2.3 million Koreans living in Japan. In the early 1940s, Japan launched a propaganda campaign, Naisen Itai, Japan and Korea are one, to make loyal subjects of the Koreans. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the Zainichi celebrated, but quickly found themselves in a state of limbo. With both Japan and Korea in ruins, about 3/4 repatriated, but about 600,000 remained behind. Now, of those who remained, life was not easy. The Zainichi, who during the colonial period were considered citizens, were suddenly found stateless. And the Allied occupying forces, who were mostly concerned with rebuilding Japan, left the question of citizenship up to the state. With normalization of relations between South Korea and Japan in 1965, the Zainichi were given the option of electing to become South Korean citizens. But that left those who were ideologically aligned with North Korea without a state. And it wasn't until 1982 that non-South Korean affiliated Zainichi were able to apply for a general permanent resident status. But permanent alien status meant that the Zainichi weren't able to participate in electoral politics, access social welfare benefits, and were openly discriminated against in the private and public sectors. Also attendant were humiliating exercises such as ward registration of alien residents and fingerprinting when they came of age, which intimated to many Zainichi an inherent criminality. And it's only recently that a domestic identity fusing Japanese and Korean together as Zainichi has emerged. Now, that's not to say that the Zainichi community and Zainichi intellectuals didn't spend considerable time wrestling with the question over identity. Much of Zainichi literature grappled with recurring themes, including colonialism, citizenship, ethno-nationalism, and passing. Even the term Zainichi is reflective of the politics of their conditional acceptance. In Minor Transpacific, I argued that there's a hidden dialogue between Korean American and Zainichi literature through the US and Japan as mediating sites. It's a multilingual study of two diasporic literary traditions, Korean American and Zainichi literature. Now, these are traditionally studied in isolation, in Asian studies and Asian American studies. But I'm arguing that these fictions are engaged in Transpacific conversation. To fully comprehend their relationship requires our building a theory of the Minor Transpacific with the US and Japan. Thanks for watching.